Okay, so here we are on, what's the day today? August 11th, and we got lots of questions to cover today. And so I'm just going to jump right into them. Just once again, you can join us on the Discord. You can join us in Twitch. The questions have priority in Twitch. Today we have plenty of questions that have already been submitted by our audience in advance just before we started. So I'm going to go ahead and just read off those. And we're going to keep it familiar and friendly. And hopefully the dog will be okay. It's been thunderstorming outside. So the first question I have is, I'm just going to read it. It says, I have 9 years experience in the finance industry. Today I received an offer from a teleco company for a software engineering role, mostly C++. I want to take this step and start from zero in this path that I want. What would you suggest to me to keep up with my peers, colleagues as an ideal point to speed up my learning? And this was one of those questions that I kind of elevated to the top as soon as I heard it, because it's really a core part of why I do the Twitch thing and the YouTube thing. Honestly, the reason I started SkillStack and spent all that money and everything was to help people get that fulfillment that they need early, but also to land empowering jobs wherever they need to, and then they can decide what else to do. So this is a real core part of this. So my first question, and you don't have to dox yourself if you don't want to, but my first question is, do you already know C++? If you're in finance, I mean, there's a lot of really smart finance guys who go back and forth between finance and IT. In fact, there is a movie about that. What is the name of that movie? There's a movie about the fall of the financial crisis as one of the big financial firms went down. And one of the internal analysts and auditors came from tech. It was actually, he was either a mathematician or a technologist. I can't remember. And he just gravitated. There was more money in the stocks and stuff. So he went into finance and ended up being the one predicting a bunch of the downfalls of the stuff that were going to happen. It wasn't The Big Short. It was another movie. I can't remember. So, if you got a good brain and you can do C++, you can do finance, you can do the whole thing. So the recommendation, you have MS and CS, passed all the C++. It was just my career happened to change to finance. Yeah, and that happens a lot, right? People that got the skills to do that kind of thing, switch over. And we actually have another question about Carbon and C++, which I want to put right after this one. And we can look at that. We're not going to, thank you for those questions. Some of the new questions we're going to have to skip, but thank you for those. Keep those coming. To keep up with your peers and everything in the C++ world, first of all, I just have to say I don't keep up with that. I think it's really unfortunate that Strager's been banned from Twitch. Strager has a lot of C++ experience and talks about it all the time. I detest the C++. You couldn't pay me enough money to code C++ for a living. I would never do it. C++ is still a great language. People use it for lots of things, primarily game development and systems that have lots and lots of lines of code. But I just have never really liked it. I would rather. I mean, again, I do operations and hacking and stuff like that, so I don't use C++ for those kinds of things. But knowing C++ and being able to develop C++ applications is very, very profitable, and I would say go for it if you want to do it. My biggest, reticence or hesitation, whatever word, for this is that I've talked about this before. I personally, and you have to make a decision for you, but I personally do not like software development jobs. I mean, if it's it's better than waiting tables or whatever, but I would rather pick an operations or a hacking job where I can code, which is pretty much everything in tech. There's coding in everything now, right? So whether you're doing operations or DevOps or security administration or whatever, systems administration, traditional kind of things, you're going to be writing code. And it just depends on what kind of code and what scale of code. You're going to be reading a lot of code because people are not going to write documentation. One of the biggest advantages that I brought to the table for the job I have now is that I can read and write Go and Bash and Perl and Python and C. And so all of this software that we have to deploy, is written in those languages. And sometimes the documentation is abysmally bad. So I can actually go into the source code and read it. So the answer implicit in that is, learn the code, even if you don't think you're going to be doing it. But I would rather not be cutting code and getting paid for it, particularly proprietary code, for all the reasons that I talked about yesterday. If you want to really get into the nuts and bolts of why I don't like software engineering jobs, you can two things. One of them, you can watch the video from yesterday where I talk about the legalese of software development, which is really a pain in the butt for most people. And two, you can watch Silicon Valley and you can compare and contrast Guilfoyle to Dinesh. And those of you who know so that series will get the joke. But I would rather be a Guilfoyle than a Dinesh. The world needs both, but I would rather be a Guilfoyle. That's just me. So, but there's people who live and die for leak code and writing that kind of thing, and they love it. And if you're chasing the Benjamins, if you're trying to go for the money, there's money in both sides. I mean, equal amounts of money on both sides. It is important that also that depending on so this is kind of an implicit question in this, but should I go into operations or should I become a developer? They're kind of like, there's like ops and apps, like they say, right? And I will tell you, I've seen multiple, bubbles burst, and having the ability to switch. I was hired as a Java engineer in the finance department at IBM, and I ended up, the bubble burst in 2000, literally while I was in training, and I switched over to become a system administrator because I had those skills as well. So then I became a system administrator who coded. And then, 6 or 7 years later, fast forward, and this, virtual server administrator application that we wrote as system administrators became so popular that it was consumed within our company and bought internally by the Tivoli group. And I became a software engineer again. And I was the same person doing the same thing. So I kept flipping back and forth between the two. And I think that's not a flex. That's just to tell you that when the economy is bad, people put their money in keeping things running that they need to keep working. And when the economy is booming, the people that are writing new stuff, making new applications, adding value to the company make way, way more money. And that goes for fintech. It goes for software, for any of this stuff. So if you have the ability and desire to flip jobs every 5-6 years, you can kind of watch, you can ride these incoming waves. And I mean, when I switched to, both times I switched to software programmer engineer as my title, I increased my salary significantly. The first time was when I got hired, and I doubled my salary when I got hired. And then after the system thing, and I got consumed by Tivoli for doing the same thing, I got an extra, I can't even remember. It was insane. It was because they just changed my title, because software programmers generally make way more money than operations people, unless you're in cloud native. If you're in cloud native, and you're learning how to manage Kubernetes and these really complex systems, we're starting to see the same kind of salaries in that arena that we saw for DB2 database administrators early on, which have been, always making ridiculously high amounts of money. But as a general rule, software developers and programmers make a lot more money than operations people, right? The people that are keeping things running, or the pen testers and stuff like that. So that is something to consider if you want to play both sides of it. I mean, if you really want to make bank, write software for operations in the cloud native industry, because the stuff that you'll have stock options and everything, you go fly. I mean, if that's your priority, yeah, you can go ahead and ask your questions, but I'm going to answer these other ones that we've had here. Okay. Sandra, thank you for being here. So there's another question that came in that's sort of related to this. And the question is, what is your opinion about Carbon? Will it be a real successor to C++? And my answer to that is this. What is Carbon and C++? I have no idea what it is. Okay. I've never heard of it. I don't know what it is. So my answer is, what is Carbon? So this was published on July 25th. There's a good hit. There's another new language on the blog, Carbon. Found out if this is worth learning. A screen displays C++ code. Since its inception, C++ has been the prime torch for building performance-intensive applications. but the language still features some outdated practices caused by its design by committee. On July 19th, 2022, during the CPP North C++ conference in Toronto, wow, that was recent, Google engineered Chandler Carruth introduced Carbon. Find out what Carbon is and how it intends to succeed C++. What is Carbon? Google engineers developed the Carbon programming language to address the shortcomings of C++. Many existing languages like Rust and Go already exist in that space. Unfortunately, these languages present significant barriers to the migration from C++ code bases. Carbon aims to be what TypeScript is to JavaScript and Kotlin is to Java. It is not a replacement, but a successor language designed around interoperability with C++. It aims for, basically, C++ did the same thing with C. And now they're doing, Carbon is going to be like on top of C++, which is on top of C. It aims for large-scale adoption and migration. I can already smell a long compilation problem here. And I don't know if that's true. It's my first impression, but it's not going to be nearly the compilation. I mean, the reason they invented Go at Google was to get over the compilation speeds above everything else. Look, Google has made lots of things that have really ridiculously failed. So don't think that because, same with Facebook, that because these companies make these things, they're going to be a thing. Laughing and see, yeah. So if it's that many layers on top of C++, they're still going to have to deal with the macro issues, which means they're going to have like redundant macro inclusion and all this stuff that slows down compilation. That is the reason that Go and Rust, that Go specifically was created. Rob Pike loves to joke that Go was conceived while they were waiting for a C++ code base to finish compiling, which is over a day at Google, apparently. So translated to Carbon, it becomes this. Another thing, too, is that it's an object-oriented, class-based object-oriented language. So I can already tell you I'm not a fan of this at all. It's just more syntax sugar on top of C++. And I'm not compelled. I mean, maybe there's a C++ programmer. It smells like Java. They're trying to, look, I already hate C++ because it's too much like Java. I think object-oriented programming languages are dead, like dead. And that nobody should be doing anything in OOP. They should be using some of the, particularly class-based OOP. There are certain areas of those languages that people can adapt and do that, and C++ of course has allowed that. But I'm not a fan of class-based object-oriented programming at all. I think it should die. I hate it. Because I've been burned by it so many times, by people who've, they want a banana, they got the whole jungle. That's what they say. And that's the problem with OOP. It's class-based OOP is just a fail. It's just a massive fail. And the fact that they have to do generics and templates and all that stuff on top of it just shows you some more. Look, you can have a different opinion from me. You don't have to come attacking me with pitchforks because you like it. But I do. I think OOP is one of the biggest mistakes in all programming, and I'm not the only one who says that. Jim Copleen talks about it, and he has a crowd at a conference. He says, "How many of you program in an object-oriented programming language?" And a few people raise their hand. And he says, "Fine. What language do you program?" And one of the guys says Java, and he goes, "Java is the only language that you cannot program object-oriented programming," and nails him to the wall. And he then proceeds to explain that class-based programming is not object-oriented programming according to the original designers. And then he says, if you program in JavaScript, you might have a chance of doing true OP, which allows basically the models of the programming to adapt to the mental models of the users. And it's a pretty advanced concept that may imply some monkey patching and things like that. So, I've never been a fan of C++. I'm a huge fan of C. C's got massive problems. It confuses me all the time. I try to learn it every Christmas, just because I need the reminder of how weird it is and how my computer works. And C's great for that. C's great for understanding your computer. And so I'm a huge fan of C. The Linux kernel, of course, and all of that software is written in C. There may be some Rust modules eventually written that can be accepted as device drivers and things like that for Linux, but there will never be any Rust or Carbon, for God's sake. And Brian Cantrell, and is it time for Rust for the operating system to be rewritten in Rust? Brian Cantrell is a lot of fun with people who have attempted to write operating systems in C++. And he doesn't pull any punches about all the stuff that's been, thrown under the bus, and he's right. And it's largely because of the inheritance problems, the diamond problem, and all that. So I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. The people who like C++ usually like it because the industry that they're in likes C++, like game devs. Game devs, I mean, that entire industry is wrapped up in C++ pretty much. That and .NET and that kind of thing. Hey, tomato. So that's what I have to say about that, I guess. So I'm not inclined to learn Carbon. It sounds cool. I mean, I'm all for people explaining, trying new things and including Rust and all that. I just don't want people to lie about it, and I don't want people to get too hyped up about it because it's trending or whatever, right? The dog wants out. Should I take a break and let her out? Here, I'll be right back. There you go. All right. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to start a language war, but somebody asked the question and we had talked about the C++ thing. So there. Next question. You like the control over memory? Most people do. And if you have an application that needs it, great. You're gonna need that anyway, right? And that's a huge debate. Right tool for the job. Right tool for the job is the short answer. And as soon as Carbon becomes the right tool for the job, maybe, yeah, use Carbon. Procedural generation, yeah. Yes, managed memory was why I left Go. Yeah, if you leave for Go, not everybody wants that. In fact, putting garbage collection in Go was kind of a Python-esque decision because they wanted to make it. The whole point of Go was compiling and writing software fast, developer velocity, whatever you want to call it, and it worked, totally worked. All right, next. Do you prefer making one big Kubernetes cluster or one for each system and service? And this is, we're shifting gears here. We're talking about Kubernetes. If you don't know what Kubernetes is, I'll just give you the TLDR. Kubernetes is the container orchestration platform. You can think of Kubernetes as, if you know what an operating system is, you know that the operating system's job is primarily running applications called processes and managing those and making sure they get time on the memory on the CPU and they get enough memory and all that. And you can list them with PS commands and things like that. You can think of Kubernetes as being exactly the same thing as an operating system like that, but for, we'll say, an enterprise scale. And so instead of having running processes and stuff like that all on one computer, you have running containers, which are running wherever in, a huge conglomerate of nodes, which are basically just, CPU. They're just computers that have been turned into, resources that are used by this central system. So if you want to imagine it, you can imagine Kubernetes being kind of like like the process, the init one, the top level process managing all these processes. It just so happens the processes are on computers all over the place. And those computers can be virtual machines. They can be Raspberry Pis. They can be, hardware, real hardware. These days, a lot of them are, deployed in Red Hat, and they have their own OS on them and everything, but they all have a little, they have some software on them, agents on there that allow them to do things. And there's other software out there to do this kind of orchestration. Nomad from HashiCorp does the same thing. And the whole point of these things is to be able to get them to run, well, and to be able to have, the redundancies of having like if you needed to scale up, all that stuff we got with AWS a long time ago, you kind of get that from Kubernetes. Kubernetes historically, I have to give you this background, otherwise you're just gonna be confused. So Kubernetes historically was called Borg at Google, and it was their way of managing all of their microservices and getting them to play nice with each other. A microservice is a running application, usually that is encapsulated inside of a container, which is, getting into a container, like something from it was never Borg, but it was inspired by Borg. Right. Okay, fine. Tiny file. But so container, think of Docker, right? A container is a way to run an application or bundle a whole bunch of applications in memory and safely run it on a system and share the resources of that system without having them impact each other. So that's a container, and the most famous container engine started from Linux was Docker, and now Docker's kind of moved out of the way for Containerd and Creo and stuff like that. So everything's about containers these days, and those containers are, you got to run those things, right? Whether you run one container on a machine or you run 10, and usually the containers are answering API requests through REST or GraphQL or gRPC, and that's a microservice, and that's the architecture. So you can think of all the little containers as being kind of like running processes on an operating system that need to talk to each other, even if they're on the same operating system. So there are a lot of parallels to the way Linux in particular is put together when you look at the bigger picture of how container orchestration works, because things are talking to each other. And yeah, so and there's lots of people that have much more background on this than me in our stream, including people that are on the Kubernetes board and people with all kinds of background that I don't have, but I'm trying to just get you background on it before when people say, because we're about to head into a conversation about Kubernetes and whether you should learn it or not, and why you might want to learn it, and how you would go about learning it, and what kind of architecture would you use. We got several questions coming about that. Full disclosure, I was hired as a Kubernetes administrator for a rather large multinational corporation doing high performance machine learning and supporting their infrastructure as an infrastructure engineer. And I had no Kubernetes experience whatsoever. I'm still not certified, and there's people like Tanis and others who are way better to go to for Kubernetes knowledge. But I'm really good at telling you like the top level things because I'm still kind of there. But I have deployed my own Kubernetes applications, and I maintain them and created the KSAP standards and conventions that we use in our team to make track of it all, to keep track of how we deploy our applications. So one of the big conversations that we've been having about this, I'm really glad Tony Faw's here, is should you deploy? What are enterprises doing, right? Because, and I'm about to dive off into a highly technical conversation, but I didn't want those who don't know what Kubernetes is to be left out. So I kind of want to give you some background, but good chance you're not going to understand what I'm about to say, a lot of it. But I want to speak directly to the people who already know what Kubernetes is. And my personal preference there, from an architectural perspective, is that we are not going to be able to escape the necessity for multi-cluster environments based on stuff we've seen historically. Like right now, I'll give you a very specific example right now. Right now, the Domino application, which is absolute trash, by the way, I don't think it's IP violation to tell you that a number of people who have been on Domino are now flocking to Vertex AI on GCP. Within our company, they are like, can't get off Domino fast enough. And Domino's this massive proprietary clusterfuck. I'm sorry, I have to say it. It's just so bad, and it's very much a lock-in kind of thing. But here's the thing that's really bad about it. And thank you for those posts. And so the reason I'm telling you this story is because Domino has held our Kubernetes cluster back. It's held us back so far that we can't even keep up with the update, keep our standard updates in the rest of our cluster. So why do you care? So the question is, do you prefer making one big Kubernetes cluster for each system or one for each system or service? Well, you can see where the answer's going, right? If we had made one cluster for Domino then Domino would have been fine, and that cluster could have stayed behind, and we could have like written it off and tell the security people to get off our backs because it wasn't our fault. We got security people breathing down our backs because we don't have the cluster upgraded to where it should be, but we're being held back by Domino. And I mean, I'm overstating that somewhat. I'm simplifying it, and I'm going to get in trouble. But so, but that is a consideration, right? So, and it's a lot like making the decision about whether you should run an application on a different server or not, right? Should I run these 10 applications on one server? Should I run a multi-user server with 10,000 people in it? Right? Should I put mail services and DNS on the same system? The architectural decision to put stuff together in a cluster is largely the same. And so, Tiny5 says he agrees clusters need fast connectivity and tend to run in a single region. Yes. The moment you need multi-region, you need more than one cluster. Absolutely. And so here's another problem. So there's this idea that, well, I mean, we learned very hard way. I wasn't involved with this, thank God, that some people tried to split their microservices and stuff across cluster providers. So now we had some people running stuff in GCP, we had people running stuff in Azure, and then we had stuff running on-prem. And that stuff all had to talk to each other, right? Now, it worked for the most part, but there was really a lot of problems in there with stuff not being able to talk to each other because of the considerations with, different types of cluster and performance and all of that. But I tell you what, if there's one thing you can take away from this, make sure you understand the technologies related to how applications communicate with each other, because I cannot overstate how important that is. Yes, please don't. Not right now. Okay, so I'm in the middle of doing a YouTube video, so I'm gonna time you out for a bit. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. So the most important thing, whether you're going to be a coder or you're going to be, a system administrator, is you have to know how, the Linux is the base operating system for all of these things. So that you have to know that, right? Go is the primary language for all of these things that have been written. And of course, shell and stuff like that. And Python sometimes to connect everything. And then you really need to know how all this stuff talks to each other. So you have to understand networking, and you have to understand how they communicate through REST or gRPC or whatever. If you don't understand any of that, you won't be able to make any decisions, whether they're at a higher architectural level or they're at a lower level when it comes to technology. And I'm going to plug the Boost till the end, because the Boost on Sunday afternoons is where we go through these things for free, slowly, and try to, incrementally build up those basic skills. And there's lots of other streamers who are helping with this as well, including Het Tennis. So yeah, rather by server ID or IP. Well, yeah. So there's lots of approaches there. So back to the question: do you prefer to make one big Kubernetes cluster or one for each service? We ended up making a separate infrastructure cluster just so that we could put all of our tools into it for monitoring and, Prometheus and Elasticsearch and all that stuff and all of our log data. And we made an entire cluster just for that, because we wanted that to not be separate, not be burdened with the other thing. But then we put our other enterprise applications, and I won't name all of them besides Domino, in our primary cluster. And that gets used by a lot of people. And then we also have GCP, and there's a number of people putting applications. We have Tecton. People are using Tecton in GCP. They're using Tecton in our we're using Jupyter Hub and things like that. So we do have applications, but every time you deploy another application, it's particularly one that's going to be consumed by a lot of people, like Jupyter Hub or Domino, you really have to think about that, about what are the implications if something changes on there. And you wouldn't think that there would be things that would, the whole point of the containerization is separating out dependencies from one another, but there actually are still a lot. So I think that the future is going to mandate smaller multi-cluster environments that are going to be hosted on-prem and in the cloud. And I think that the research and the people in our stream have pretty much confirmed that that's the future. And that means that if you're in that space where you're helping clusters communicate together, I think that's the future. I don't see any other way for it to go. Building a big behemoth singular cluster. First of all, you're going to blow out the max number of nodes and resource constraints. We're actually hitting all kinds of resource problems recently too, because we're just using too much of it for too many different things. So just like you would size a computer that you were going to put an application on, you can do that. So Tony Fa says the future is multi-cluster with complexity pushing into management of those clusters. Yeah. As this continues to grow, we're going to see cluster management orchestration getting simplified. I always like to use the example of PDFs. There was once upon a time, when people actually wrote in PostScript. Does anybody remember this? Back when, if you wanted to program your printer to do something fancy, you would write PostScript, right? And PostScript is a bunch of instructions that get sent to your printer that cause it to make lines in the right way. And some of you may be old enough to remember that. And then PDFs came about because of PostScript. They're just rendered versions of this language. But when's the last time any of you have ever used PostScript, right? Or even HTML? I mean, that kind of technology is getting kind of consumed, and right, like LaTeX and stuff is going, and it's progressing like that. But we're nowhere near that with Kubernetes. But I do believe that the complexity of Kubernetes will eventually become kind of like how we use machines and Linux machines now. PSLS. It's very similar, and learning Kubernetes is kind of like learning another distro or another type of operating system. It really is, because if you think about all the moving parts in it. And so if you're going to go into the Kubernetes learning, I think you need to really think of it that way. You're learning imagine how much work it would take for you to learn how to write a kernel driver for Kubernetes. For Linux. Well, it's not dissimilar to say that if you're going to write a controller and your own, custom resource description and all that stuff for Kubernetes, they're going to be doing this thing. Just creating the Klogin code that I wrote required immense knowledge of like how to do OIDC authentication, the parallel to which would be learning how to do, I don't know, what's that really bad word in Linux with security? What's it called? SC Linux, right? So, knowing, you don't think about writing SC Linux applications, you just use SC Linux, right? But if you have to write your own Klogin, you're basically writing your own SC Linux layer. It's just kind of the same thing. There's a parallel is what I'm saying. And so when you go into it, it's super easy. It's not like learning Docker Compose. People think that that I'm going to sit down in an afternoon and I'm going to learn Kubernetes the same way that I learned Docker, how to make a Docker file. And to be fair, it took me about a weekend to get relatively good with Docker files and using Docker. And people come into Kubernetes and they want the same thing, and it's not the same thing. Learning Docker files will help you understand all the different resources in Kubernetes, but there's a huge learning curve there, and that is a known industry problem. It's actually the biggest industry problem right now, is they can't get people who understand cloud native technologies such as Kubernetes at all, and they just can't find them. So if you can get that skill, is it good? And that brings me to the next question. And this will be the question I'll probably wrap it up with for today. We're only going to go till 6:30. I think we're wait, what time is it? We're supposed to go from 6:30 to 7:30. Did I go too fast? Where are we, people? Let me just do a time check real quick. Where's our time? How are we on time? All right, we got another half hour. Okay. Wow, I've been talking fast. All right, so we talked about that one. So here's the question. What is the outlook of Kubernetes jobs in the coming years? And what is the outlook of Kubernetes jobs in the coming years? And let me ask you, I know you all have been chiming in, and I have to be careful because I look at the chat too much. It saps my attention and I can't focus. But yeah, so Kubernetes jobs in the coming years, I think that Kubernetes jobs are still strong. Having worked in with Kubernetes internally a little bit for more than like a year and a half now, I can say that It's not going anywhere, even if you don't want it. Getting daily requests to interview on Kubernetes-based jobs. Yes, on LinkedIn. Yes. There is a ton of, if you have any close ability to do Kubernetes, you're going to be in massive demand. And the jobs for, I mean, even entry-level Kubernetes people, by the way, an entry-level Kubernetes person is not a DevOps person. It's usually somebody who knows networking and Linux and coding to some degree and scripting and Python. So an entry-level Kubernetes person is usually somebody that would equate to, a senior, Linux system administrator or SRE. So the pay is way better. I mean, the median salary for Kubernetes people is 150K. Median salary. So, and you go look them up on Indeed if you want to go look up this stuff there. Bash for sure, yeah. Bash and containerization and Docker. I mean, to know Kubernetes means that you know so many other things, right? You can't even learn Kubernetes until you've got a substantial amount of Linux under. The cap is way higher too, yeah. And your chances of getting a job are higher. In fact, I seriously consider going into getting security, but there's actually a huge niche in Kubernetes security right now, and that's even higher. I mean, if you want to focus, and if you want to follow any of that, by the way, follow Tony Fa or Chris Nova or any of these people that have been doing the Kubernetes forever and really know the innards of it. And there's like really great jobs in it. It's a lot of learning. And you're like, I don't want to learn Kubernetes. There's so much to learn. And that's why we do the boost. I'm going to say it again. There's other people who are doing similar things. And if you can, whatever matches your needs. But the boost on Sundays is to help people get there. And I am not exaggerating. My recruiter calls me every 2 weeks asking for jobs. There are 2 entry-level DevOps positions right now. These are not Kubernetes positions that are unfilled. And he's saying, please send me people. So as Dr. Berman and others have been telling you, like, oh, nobody's hiring, there's no jobs. No, there's tons of jobs for people who have skills. And full remote. Both of them are full remote. So, it takes a significant investment to get these skills. But the lack of people who know these things is so large that, you can look like a rock star without certs. Is a good question. And I actually made a whole video about certs, and I'm going to send you a link to that. I made a video called Why Certify, and I'm going to let you go and watch that and see what I feel about certs. I even make a chart for that. The question is, should I certify? It depends. And in the cloud native space, I think it could help for sure, but I don't think it's required at all. I didn't. I'm still working on my certs. And so, yeah, anyway, it's going to be huge. Kubernetes is already huge. It's just going to get bigger. And even if Kubernetes goes away, and I will tell you this, I have a Russian degree. Yeah. And I'm working in, an pretty good IT career. So you don't have to have it. It can help you to have a degree, and it can help you to have certifications and stuff, but you want to go make that assessment on your own. Chris Nova, by the way, I'm going to say it again, has lots of really great things to say on this topic. Chris shared on Twitter publicly. Did I spell that right, Tony Fa? How come I got it wrong? Is it one word? I just saw her on Twitter talking about it. Oh, anyway, you guys can find Chris. Chris is doing amazing things, and the thing I love about Chris is I love Chris's background. There we go. Thank you for that. Let me give her background. Chris Nova is very approachable, very knowledgeable, and absolutely self-taught 100% across the board. So much so that Google told her that they didn't want to hire her. This is according to her Twitter. You can go read her Twitter feed. And then she's like, one of the world-renowned Kubernetes experts out there, writing several books on the whole thing. And, she just snickers on Twitter. It's kind of fun. So it does open doors. Having those pieces of paper opens certain doors for you, but you don't necessarily need them. I have heard the statistic that people who have a degree of some kind make 30% more at every stage of their career. That's a stat from Adams Ruins College, who suggests that everybody at least get a degree, at least in the United States. Even if it's from a community college, it doesn't matter what kind of college it is. They just have to have it. And you don't need a degree to run a Kubernetes cluster. Yeah. No CS degree, no issues. And I think there are a lot of people like that. But it doesn't mean you don't have to do any work, though. And I want to be sure that we talk about that. It doesn't mean that you don't do any work, right? You still have to, as I told you, employment is about trust. You have to be able to prove to your potential employer that you're trustworthy and you can do it. That means they want to see what you can do, either live, real time on a whiteboard, or they're going to want to see, what you've done. They're going to want to see your talks. They're going to want to see what you've published. They want to see that you can communicate with others. They're going to want to know those things. So the people that complain about not being able to get a job, despite all of this talk that we're having, almost always are from another country who are having trouble. That is something I've noticed. There are people that are having a lot of trouble outside of America getting jobs. And so they hear people like us talking about how easy it is to get a job, and then they're struggling because their economy and their needs are different. Particularly India and Germany, they have like real important requirements before you can even get that job. And in India right now, as I understand it, I don't know, but what I hear is that in India it's like intensely competitive. IT jobs in India are intensely competitive, and because there's just so many people that are going for those jobs in India. India is kind of exploding on the scene when it comes to IT. I mean, I would say probably, this is going to sound racist. I don't mean it to, but I would say probably 70% of the substantial occupations and people that are fulfilling roles and stuff that I work with are Indian nationals. Who are working remote, or they're working outsourcing, or they've moved to America or Canada or something like that. So it's just something that I've observed. I had the same observation about people from Brazil in 2000. There were a lot of people hiring outsourcing to Brazil, and while I was in IBM, there was a ton of outsourcing to Romania. So yeah. Yeah, the reason I mentioned is because it depends. This whole how easy is it for you to get a job really depends. And one of the reasons it's super easy to get an engineering job in America is because, and I'm going to say it, there's so many lazy Americans. I'm going to say it. I'm so sorry. I'm going to get death threats and hate mail for this, but I'm going to say it. Our education system is totally broken. We have been beaten down, for trying to be creative and think outside the box since we were children. And, we have these dogmatic systems all over the place. And on top of all of that, we don't even have, the drive to do it because we would rather fail. I see this so much. It just frustrates me. So I don't want to end in a rant. I want to talk about something positive, but there is a lot in America. There are a lot of people who complain about not having work or having work go someplace else and all this other stuff. And yet they don't want to do math because it's hard, or they don't want to learn to code, or I give them a computer and I give them the means to do it. And then they take the computer and never return it and just take the t-shirt, and they just want they want the culture of it. They want the culture of the engineering. They want hacker culture and all this stuff, but they don't actually want to do the time to put it in. I had a guy tell me the same thing, and he finally confessed to me. He goes, "Mister," I said, "why didn't you do your Python this week again?" He goes, "You could talk a big game as a Bitcoin guy." And I was like, "Okay, well, where's your Python work?" He goes, "I got to just confess, I really don't like coding." I'm like, "Okay, but I like talking about tech and code." I said, "Fine, be a salesperson or whatever, and that's fine. We need those people." I said, "But there's so many engineers who just don't want to do it, or they want to do the engineering stuff enough so they can get like a senior or mid-level position where they're not going to do any coding, they're just going to make money." And I'm sorry to call it out like that, but that's pretty true in America. All right, so I love my country. I love the people that are here, but I also have been around them a long time, and I'm sad to say that and perhaps this is true for other countries too, and I'm just not able to see it or observe it. But but I don't see the hunger, and I don't see the fixing your own problem drive. I see a lot of complaining. There's a ton of complaining, and there's very legitimate complaining going on, but most of the complaining that I'm talking about is the kind where people complain and then they don't do anything. They don't do anything to change their situation. They don't realize they have the whole internet. They can, and the people are doing things like the Boost or other things for free or free code camp. But the people who want to take control of their own destiny can do it, and I've seen people do it. So anyway, I'm probably going too long. How much time we got? Another 15 minutes. I'm really on one today, aren't I? All right, let's go back. So we've got what's the difference between VMware and Virtualbox? And then we'll do some fun stuff here. In a nutshell, it's true for UK as well, to some extent. It was more fun than ComSci. Electronics engineering, yeah, I think I would probably be inclined to do that. Let's ask, okay, so this is an easy one. VMware and Virtualbox are both virtualization technologies. That means that you have a virtual machine instead of a real machine. By machine, we mean computer. And so you can actually boot a computer inside of a computer, and you can look at it. I used to run Dota 2, which is Windows only at the time, on my Linux machine by running it inside of virtual VMware at the time. So these are technologies. The Virtualbox started out as an independent company or something, and it got consumed or bought by Oracle. Oracle now runs it. There is another one called Kimu or libvirt, and there's three general virtualization groups, I guess. There's VMware, the proprietary thing that started all of it, pretty much. I mean, there was other people doing virtualization, IBM in particular, way before VMware, but VMware got all the credit. They're the first ones that made a consumer-based virtualization technology, and they've been around forever. I mean, since the 90s, actually, I think. And then Virtualbox was kind of a new kid on the block who wanted to be like Virtualbox, but virtual VMware, but free, and that kind of kept doing its thing. Yeah, FreeBSD is kind of a different virtualization technology. They do have that vHive and thing. And all the virtualization does is it makes it so that the RAM, the memory, and the number of CPUs, the brains, they can be adjusted. You can say, I want to give this 2 CPUs, and I want to give this, 20 gigabytes of RAM, and you can turn it up and down, and you can mess around with it. You can run like 3 or 4 virtual machines on the same computer, and you can have them talk to each other, and you can have one run a microservice. You can have one do coding. You can have another one, running a bot talking to Discord. You can do whatever. They're virtual machines. And so virtualization kind of predated containerization somewhat. They're kind of in parallel, actually, if you consider shrouded environments. But they kind of came about. And VMware used the Linux kernel. Now they have shared the code finally. I didn't know that. So, and at VMware, very, very newsworthy thing, they were just bought by, Broadcom, which is kind of funny because Broadcom has the picture of Linus Torvalds flipping off the camera. That's him flipping off Broadcom for not releasing the driver source years ago. And so Broadcom has a very troubled past when it comes to open source. And now they bought VMware, and the guy who invented Kubernetes worked for VMware for a while. I don't remember. Did I get that right? I forget the name. And he quit. He retired as soon as they got bought. So there's some question about whether VMware or Virtualbox or Kimu /libvirt /kvm /zen, and that, which is kind of the Linux only kind of way of doing it, are going to be used. And the VMware Virtualbox thing is, VMware does have like an enterprise offering, but the enterprise virtualization space is dominated by KVM and KView these days. I mean, that's what Amazon runs on all of their stuff. They switched from Zen to KVM some years back. So KVM is the virtualization technology for cloud. I mean, I don't think anybody would debate that. Would anybody take exception to that? I mean, KVM, but when we're talking about that, you're not talking about a consumer product. You're talking about something that's creating a container instance at scale, in the cloud. And so that's sort of a different consumer space than I want to run Windows on my Linux machine. And running into VMware images, Kubernetes without having to change anything. That's interesting. In private, the acquisition was unrelated. Interesting. Yeah. KVM QEMU is the hardware. Yeah. KVM is the hardware layer and QEMU is all the emulation stuff. libvirt runs using QEMU apparently. So when you're talking about virtualization, it's super easy to get confused because you have a conversation going on about virtualizing the desktop experience, for me and you, for, trying out different things on our desktops and stuff, and running Kali Linux, for example, on a Windows machine, all of those things, right? And then you have the entire cloud space, which is largely dominated by, low-level stuff like KVM and QEMU, pretty much KVM all the way, that's running the same sort of thing. It's running virtualization. It's doing it at cloud scale. And frankly, it's usually headless, which means there's no desktop environment related at all. And it's to solve an entirely different need. I want to fire up, 100 servers that are all going to run Postgres or whatever. And then you have containerization on top of that. So that's a totally different conversation from how do I run, Linux on my Mac. And so it's important if you're going to go into this conversation to keep those two separate. And then it gets a little gray because VMware actually does have an enterprise sort of cloud-like offering called the SXI, which is designed to help with all that things, even though it's not very popular, unless you're in certain enterprises. And somebody's going to shoot me for saying that, but throw tomatoes. Let's see. MS Azure is all MS hypervisor stuff, but they can VM. Yeah, and then that's another thing probably important to mention that. So Microsoft has wandered into this whole thing some time ago and created their own hypervisor. Hypervisor is a virtualization technology that makes it able to separate the machine from the actual hardware. I mean, I'm oversimplifying like crazy, but that's what we're talking about. So yeah. Yeah, ESXi is huge in enterprise environments. Yes, it is. There are a lot of enterprise environments where actually, when I was at IBM, I wrote a bunch of Perl to integrate BigFix, actually, to integrate BigFix checks against ESXi, if you know those, name dropping a little bit. But since then, IBM sold BigFix. They bought it and then they sold it. But so yeah, ESXi is a VMware product for the enterprise that you probably won't hear about or need to learn unless you get into the enterprise. And it would be almost impossible for you to learn it on your own, as far as I know. Do they have it? Does anybody know? Do they have like a lab free, open core kind of business model on ESXi? Can I run ESXi on my IKEA stack? I don't think you can. I mean, I have it ESXi book somewhere because that was really getting into learning it. So anyway, those are the differences. You can install it for free. Can you? Yeah, there are some free. That's right. Interesting. I mean, we don't support that environment. I personally am interested in getting really good with libvirt, QEMU, and KVM in the cloud space, including Cloud Init, which is, a type of cloud-friendly, Linux image that can come up. And I actually started a project called Fluff for happy little clouds on your desktop using, your whatever virtualization you're using. I started out using Virtualbox and then I switched to VMware. So the last thing I'm going to say about VMware and Virtualbox is somewhat negative. And it's related to my recent experiences with Virtualbox. So last year when I started the boost, we did it based on containers, right? And that was fine. And then we realized there were some things that we could not test in containers, such as, storage capacity and some things like that. And so I decided in this last boost to do what I've always done and go back to pushing the use of a virtual machine. And my initial thought was to use VMware because it's reliable. I've used it forever and it has a free player that'll let you run one virtual machine on your desktop. And I was kind of talked out of that by people who said, well, VirtualBox is free. You can do whatever you want on it. It has far more support in Vagrant, blah, blah, blah. And I did. They talked me out of it. And I started using VirtualBox for the last year until the third week into the boost. And during that week, there's people on the stream who saw this. VirtualBox completely and totally collapsed. It started throwing like really bad CPU locking loops that were like causing my fans to go on. And it was just really bad. And all I did was click on upgrade. And I went to the latest one, and some people helped me figure this out. They actually sent the big issues list where the latest VirtualBox is dead. It has no support for Hyper-V, and they have no intention of fixing it. And they said, if you want to have support for this, you have to stay back on this old level version. And I was like, I am not telling people in the boost to do that anymore. And I went back to VMware, and I was just so happy. I have a Pro, to be fair, I have a VMware Pro license. I have had for, God, a decade. And it was terrible. It was so terrible. And you know, people are like, what? Why aren't you supporting open source? And then we had somebody who works at Virtualbox. And if you're here, I apologize. Please don't dox yourself. We had somebody who worked at Oracle say, the other reason that I wanted to go with Virtualbox was because I wanted to be able to run on everything. And then Mac came out with M1, and the people at Oracle have said, the QEMU and KVM stuff is nice. It's just not consumer friendly for the desktop user. It's not. And by the way, Docker desktop uses QEMU. So anyway, so VirtualBox kind of, you know, crapped out and did horrible things. And at the same time, I was like, well, what are we going to do? Because Docker is proprietary now, and I want to teach people stuff that they can use in the enterprise, and they can't use it in an enterprise, most enterprises. And so, like, what are we going to do? And then at the same time, Oracle made a public statement in a written press release that said, we are not supporting M1 nor M2 or anything else out of Apple, any ARM, and we never will. And then the internal Oracle person said, not only are they not going to support it, but internally they're getting off of it. All their internal systems, they're getting ready to retire VirtualBox internally at Oracle, the company that's supposedly supporting it and everything. And as soon as I heard those words, I was done. I don't want anything to do with VirtualBox ever again. I am never touching it. I'm never recommending it to anybody. If it works for you, fine. I mean, I know that there's a lot of companies that depend on it. There's vagrants, rules that depend on it. But I am never, ever touching it again. Podman is good, but it's a container framework. And it can't do things like, it can't do things that VMs can do. And that's really important. For example, you can't snapshot a pod, not easily. I mean, with VMware, I click a button and I've just snapshot and do whatever I want. Literally one button, and it's snapshotted, right? So those kinds of use cases are easier with VMware. Did they say no? They didn't say what? No, I just felt really fortunate to have somebody talking to us, because it's hard to get anybody who's inside Oracle to say anything. Yeah, I mean, snapshotting in VMware, which has always been rock solid. The other thing about VMware is just rock solid. And you can say what you want about free and open source software, but a lot of times proprietary software is just better because people are paying for it. Not always, particularly if there's a monopoly. But VMware doesn't have a monopoly. It's had a lot of pressure from a lot of angles. And the latest VMware product, I'm going to sound like a fanboy, like they're paying me off or something, but I really like it. And I originally, one of the deciding factors for going off of VMware onto VirtualBox was I wanted to help people emulate multiple machines on a single machine, and you cannot do that with VMware unless you pay. Being phased out, more work will go into libvirt and KVM and make it more friendly. I agree, Flying Wookiee, and I pray to God that happens. I really do, because libvirt and QEMU are the way to go. libvirt and QEMU are what if libvirt and QEMU actually can get off the ground and have a company like Docker come in and annoy all the Linux people, but make it useful for users, because that's kind of what Docker did. I'm all for that. We need a company to do that, and no company has stepped up to that yet. No company has stepped up to make, or no project has stepped up to make libvirt and QEMU and KVM acceptable for it as a desktop environment yet. Look, if you're being honest with yourself, and you've used QEMU with its emulation layers and different stuff like that, and you've compared it to VMware, you got to admit that it's not on par yet. It's not there, not as a consumer grade application. Latest kernels with Apple M1, but they're expecting them to fix it. Yeah, the other thing too about VMware is VMware has openly stated that they will support every M1 product, and they have a business partnership with Apple on that. Now, whether you hate them or love them, it doesn't matter. You just want to run Linux on your Mac. And the only option right now is VMware, period. In fact, Fusion is still free. So somebody had the link. I don't have it in front of me right now, but it's weird. You have to click around, but they have a trial of VMware Fusion, I guess, for Mac, and it's kind of like, particularly for the M1, it's like settling down the problem with people not being able to get Linux on their Mac, period. And so a lot of people are just writing BSD kind of things. I think monolithic applications are going to take care of a lot of that problem, and that's one of the reasons I'm making my Bonsai Z program, is because I want to be able to just run my programs everywhere. I don't care if it's BSD Unix under the hood. I just want to be able to use my stuff. And I don't want to have to depend on a virtualization environment at all. And I personally think the future is going to be more of these cross-platform functionality things that are built into the actual apps, and whether or not they have a containerization interface on them. I think we're going to see containerization grow, but I think we're also going to see monolithic applications kind of take center stage, like Git, GH. I mean, we're starting to see a lot of applications that are taking this model on, and I hope to see that happen. Zen uses KVM QEMU. It's web GUI. What are we talking about? Zen and KVM are totally different. Unless you're talking about something else. Yeah, bad habit for hosting VMware environments. I would only use Workstation if I needed the mobility to have everything with me. Otherwise, I would host on EX6i and SSH in. Yeah, and that's what most do. Most people will just put it in a cloud. If they have the money, they'll just fire up a cloud server and they just SSH into it. That's what I do here. But it's not always good to do that. Sometimes it's good to have a VM right there, like I'm running right now, right? I'm running a pretty powerful Linux VM on my Windows machine, and I forget all the time I'm on Windows. And I SSH into it every day. I don't run it with it. And you can set up SSH. You can SSH from there into your Windows desktop. It's kind of cool. So that's enough on that. We've been talking for about an hour. It's probably too much for anyone to listen to. But Proxmox, I do want to look at that. I haven't played with it at all yet. Everybody's talking good things about it. Again, I'm going to shout out Het Tennis if you want to do this kind of stuff. Het lives and breathes this stuff all the time, even more than me, and much more than me, actually. So you might want to. He just got certified. He just went for a CKA. So Podman for Windows? No. I mean, look, you can run containers and Podman on Windows, but there's other problems there, right? Sometimes you need more than a container. And if you don't know why, I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you to go figure out, because you just can't say that a container is going to do everything. And I've been burned by that many times. As a system administrator, a lot of times the things that I need to emulate and test and play around with relate to like hardware device things, procs and PROCS, right? And managing of memory, LVM management, messing around. I mean, especially if you're learning. If you're trying to learn and you want to do logical volume mount management, forget using Podman for that. So in many ways, it's just a no-brainer to use a VM. And by the way, speaking of VMs, I will put a little plug-in for the Boost VM, which I made. It's still got, it still can get better, but I made a VM image just for the Boost that you can download that is almost exactly what I use every day. And it's, it's got my colors and my applications all set up in it and stuff like that. And that's the kind of thing that you want from a VM. And that functionality overlaps with what you can do with a container. But that way, if you just want to play around, you will have to figure out how to SSH into the thing and get it started. But you can do that by running it, with a terminal first. Chrome OS has the same concept. Yes. Very nice. I can't. We won't talk about WSL right now. All right, I think I'm going to have to wrap up today. I appreciate you all being here. I'm going to answer these other questions really quick. What is the best meal that your wife has cooked for you? I don't know. I would have to say her spaghetti. She makes the most amazing. She makes so much good food, but her spaghetti is so good. And she would hate that I said that as as the food, but she just makes so many amazing things. It's really hard to say. What type of budget will I need to get started building my IRL rig? Answer this question really quick. If you want to do IRL streaming, here is my IRL rig. That is its entire size. That's it. It's got a fan. It's got a battery. This thing will run for 7 hours. The cost of that is about $1,500, and then you have to pay about $150 a month in costs to get to get service and mobile wireless is what I'm talking about. So that's about the type. If you want to watch me do IRL stuff this Saturday, so I don't know whether it's gonna be Saturday or Sunday, but one of these days I'm going to be streaming, cleaning up my room here and putting my other rigs together. I have 2 more Jetson Nano Bella boxes I have to put together, and then I'll have 3 at that point. And I'm going to be putting those together and streaming the whole thing. So if you want to do the IRL rig thing, you can tune in then. I've been keeping a budget on the whole thing, and I'm at the point where it's stable enough that it's time for me to start documenting it. I am trying to make another video series about that, but there's so much time in the day. Let's see, how much does a streamer of my size make? I off of Twitch, how many subs do I have right now? I don't even know. I mean, I don't have very many subs. I maintain about 120, 150 subs pretty regularly, and I stream pretty much all day, but my average from Twitch varies from probably 270 to like 270, I think 350 1 month. Yeah, because I'm a small streamer. I don't stream that much. I do get about another 300 from GitHub sponsorships. And by the way, thank you very much for those. That's my preferred method of support. Because that, I get a higher percentage of it if you have GitHub, and you get a fancy little icon, and if, I appreciate the subs and the bits and all of those things. But yeah, thank you for the sub. And if somebody else is a bigger streamer, I don't do it for that, right? I do it. I have a job so that I'm not a dancing monkey, beholden to the people who pay me. I still will dance for you though. So, anyway, so that's the budget there. As soon as you stream to the level that I do, you have enough money to pay for your. I have enough money coming in to pay for my account costs, my Wi-Fi, and to pay for some beer every other weekend, and I'm still gonna have to pay off all the equipment that I've had to experiment with and wasted money on, but yeah, and I can go through the expenses with you if you want to do that, but it's a good hobby. I mean, I would pay this money anyway because I'm doing it for fun. Yeah, I'm just doing it for fun. So if I were doing it to make money, I would have to be thinking about, otherwise I can't just walk through the grocery store or whatever. The Twitch money does support Twitch, and I want to support Twitch, but I think Twitch takes an unusually high share personally. I mean, they take at least half of everything. So, that's like Apple store money. And then they ban like really amazing streamers for no reason at all. I mean, they take half. Twitch takes half. So if I bring in 200, think about that for a second. So, look, and you get emotes through Twitch. I mean, look, I am not here to tell you not to support anyone through Twitch. I think it's an amazing way to do it. But they really controlled the narrative into making it sound like that's the best way to support the platform, blah, blah, blah. And they've got, I mean, come on, Amazon owns them. It's not like they're ever going to have a financial problem. I mean, Amazon, who doesn't pay any tax for 5 years in a row at all, owns Twitch, and Twitch's problem was supporting the platform. Bullshit. So no, I'm not buying it. It's not to mention the fact that they're pushing up the ads more and everything. We don't have any control over that. I gifted subs. I appreciate all your stuff. You're fast tracking your ban. I'm not fast tracking my ban. They're not going to ban me. I haven't said anything that's not truthful. If they ban me for saying things that are truthful, I haven't violated the TOS at all. If they're going to try to find something, I mean, wouldn't it be? Yeah. But I mean, this is another thing. The positive thing about Twitch is that they're a really good place to build a community. They're the best place to build a community. You can come in here and just hang out and meet people and build up a community. But here's the thing. Once you build up a community, that community is going to follow you. They will. They'll follow you and they'll tell their friends. And they have. And they have in other cases where people have been banned. And I don't want to talk about that. But, you know, I support Twitch and I think it's a great company. I do support the company, but I just think that not telling them ways that they can improve is a mistake. I would want somebody to tell me ways to improve. Right? So anyway, is it normal to be a junior for a junior software engineer to not find fulfillment in a job? Yes. It is very normal. First of all, don't call yourself a junior. You're not junior. You just started. It doesn't mean you're a junior. You're a software engineer. Actually, call yourself a software developer and you'll feel better. It might be that you don't like to code. And if you don't like to code, just deal with it until you can find something else you want to do or find more fulfillment when you're not coding. Don't make your job your source of fulfillment. Okay. When you're a partner, Twitch takes less. That will be interesting to see. I'll never be partner though, because I don't ever maintain 75 people at a time because I stream everything. I stream cleaning my room. I stream. They're never going to give me partner. No, I've been wanting to get partner because of other reasons, like, you know, variable bit rate. I mean, variable bandwidth for people who are consuming it. Yeah. Reject the title. Don't go with the word junior. You have skills and those skills make money. And you have skills and experience, and just base it on that. Don't sell yourself short on that. How many times does Doris swear a day? And her answer was too many to count. Room cleaning stream. We'll have to have a Leon raid room cleaning stream. No. Yeah, Leon is skilled at many things, and one of the things that Leon is really, really good at is marketing. And I don't fault him at all for it. He's got an amazing way with people and with marketing his stream without seeming like a sellout. I mean, he uses some techniques that kind of push my boundaries, but you know, what is the thing where you have to actually so you have to check in, you have to send a tweet or something, and there's mandatory social media activities in order to participate in the program, which is cool. I mean, you know, if you want to force people to do those things, I don't know, that borders on a boundary for me. I don't know if I can do that, but I absolutely love Leon. And I love all the things that they're doing. I would rather have a smaller community anyway, honestly. He does coddle people. He does. Yeah. But that's what people want, Dr. Worm. He's addressing a specific audience. And by the way, his audience is not insignificant. The people that he's dealing with need the way that this is. People don't want to hear this. But people that he's dealing with need this. And this kind of goes back to that thing about America, people not wanting to do anything. People are terrified because for whatever reason, they don't think they can learn it, or they don't want to do it on their own, or they need some hand holding, or they've been forced to be handheld all this time. So that's the only way they know to learn. And, you know, it's hard for me because I'm a totally different generational approach. My wife and I talked about this the other night. You know, we were left at, you know, we came home, we fed ourselves, we latchkey kids and stuff, a much different approach. And, you know, hopefully you survive the day. Right? But and it's not just generational. All I'm trying to say is that there is something for everybody. And there is a certain group of people who might need more handholding initially until they can stand up on their own. And my community, one of the reasons it's so small is because I reject those people a lot of times. I filter them out. In fact, the first year I was abusive to them practically. They would come in here and they would ask me what time it was or what my time zone was. And it was on the screen. And I'd say, figure it out. And they'd be like, why do you have to be such an asshole? And I said, because I'm trying to help you learn. And I would push back too hard and then they would leave. And, but because I wanted to foster a community where the filter was people actually had already taken, ownership of their learning, and, they were not intellectually lazy. Intellectually lazy, it's my term for someone who will walk over to the cubicle and ask you a question rather than just asking. And by the way, I have been very lazy before. What time is it? It's like my watch is right here, right? We all do it, right? But how much do you do it, right? Do you ask somebody questions that you could have Googled in 2 seconds? Are you the one doing the Googling, or are you the one asking the question, right? Well, I would rather my community be filled with people that are willing to take on the role of doing that. And when I push back on them, by the way, it's for their good, because I don't want them to wander into an IRC channel someday and get totally ripped a new one, or, go into, any kind of social situation with a particular set of technologists. And you can call them assholes all you want, but they're not always assholes. They're just impatient. And today I actually got kind of short with Frank, actually, because he hadn't done the research to talk about it, and he was distracting me from my job. And I kind of got short with him a little bit, and because I was like, I don't want to talk to you until you go read about this. And I wasn't being mean. I was being focused. But to some of the people that you possibly are subscribing on Leon's stream, that kind of behavior gets the message. And I've had these messages in my chat before. It turns out you're just as big as asshole as I've heard. And I'm like, I guess I am, it's like, and so I have this like reputation for being, a horrible person, a mean person. And some of it's justified, but I think some of it is unfair, because I'm just forcing you to be accountable. If you force certain people to be accountable and do their own work, they will immediately cancel you and walk out the door. I'll go find somebody who's going to do it for me and tell me everything I need. I mean, this whole, whatever. I'm getting ranty. I want to go eat my food. Maybe that's why I'm ranty. I promise you, I'm trying really hard to be a better person for you. I really am. But please, learn to be a hacker, learn to learn like a hacker, learn to answer your own questions as best as you can, and then do the work. And if you can't do the work and you get stuck, then you can go to someone and you can say, you know what? I have a question. I need some advice on something. I've been thinking about this a lot. Here's what I've thought about. Here's what I've tried. What do you think? And you'll get a much more respectful answer from that. Your reputation will increase. And by the way, this exists in every domain. My wife is struggling right now with some stuff happening in her day camps that is very much related to this. And it's a completely separate, enterprise. It's art. So this goes for everybody. I guess I'm getting hangry. So it's time for me to go. So I thank you so much for being here. And I'll go ahead and put this up today. I will be back in about half an hour, and I don't know what I'll be doing. There'll probably be some drinking involved, probably some cleaning up, probably some coding, maybe some gaming. I don't know. I haven't decided, but I'll decide later. Talk to you then. I should stop ranting like that. Bye, everybody.